Since our thoughts, our thought patterns, and our beliefs create our life experiences, it becomes important to recognize when our thinking becomes distorted. This series explores the terms and thought patterns from Section 6 of our Spiritual Nutrition. By learning to recognize these patterns within ourselves, and by realigning our thinking with divine truth, we can begin to stop repeating the learned patterns that create negative outcomes. And gradually, we begin to experience greater peace in our lives. In this video, we will explore 5 related thought patterns from Section 6: blaming others, blaming self, resentment, spite, forgiveness. This set explores what can happen after we have been hurt. Blame can distort responsibility in either direction. Unresolved hurt can become resentment, and resentment can turn into spite or a desire for revenge. Forgiveness offers another path, seeing responsibility clearly, seeking understanding, releasing what we no longer need to carry, and reclaiming our freedom to move forward. Blaming others. Core pattern. Thought pattern preventing us from looking for the truth about our part in our own misfortune and contributes to the patterns of denial, guilt tripping, and feeling like a victim. How it manifests. Focusing on what someone else did wrong, looking for who is at fault, repeatedly recounting another person's mistakes, or resisting examination of our own contribution. Sounds like, "It is your fault. It is not my fault. If they hadn't done that, I wouldn't feel this way." Spiritual effects. Unable or unwilling to accept responsibility for less than positive results. See perfectionism. Habitual blame can keep our attention on another person's choices and make it difficult to recognize where we still have choice and agency. Physical effects. Habitual blame contributes to Alzheimer's disease, arthritis, eye problems, heartburn, indigestion, high blood pressure, kidney problems, thyroid diseases, tooth decay. Origin of pattern. May develop when admitting mistakes was associated with criticism, punishment, shame, rejection, or loss of approval, or when blaming was modeled as the normal response to conflict. Change the pattern. Meditate to learn whose approval we are trying to gain by pretending to be innocent of faults. Shift the question from "whose fault is this?" to "what is my part in this and what can I learn?" Recognize what belongs to us and what belongs to others. Taking responsibility for our part restores our ability to choose differently. Blaming self. Core pattern. Thought pattern that prevents us from looking for the truth about others' role in our painful life experiences and prevents us from giving ourselves permission to live well. How it manifests. Taking excessive responsibility, assuming another person's behavior is our fault, repeatedly questioning what we should have done differently, apologizing when we have done nothing wrong, or using responsibility as self-punishment. Sounds like, "I brought this on myself. I should have known better. If I had done something differently, this wouldn't have happened." Spiritual effects. Unable or unwilling to accept that others are responsible for their choices, constant apologizing, feeling like a victim. Self-blame can make us carry responsibility that was never ours and weaken our ability to see each person's agency clearly. Physical effects. Habitual self-blame contributes to anemia, arthritis, depression, eye problems, low blood pressure, hypochondriasis, sinus issues, poor posture, thyroid diseases, tooth decay. Origin of pattern may develop when we were frequently blamed, criticized, shamed, or made responsible for other people's emotions and behavior. Change the pattern. Meditate to learn whose approval we are trying to gain by pretending to be responsible for everything bad in our lives. Ask, what genuinely belongs to me and what belongs to someone else? Learn from our own choices without carrying another person's choices. A mistake does not require lifelong punishment. Resentment. Core pattern. Holding on to a deep-seated grudge against someone who has hurt or offended us. We can even get addicted to the high that comes from allowing our hurt to excuse us from behaving responsibly. Can become a habitual response to people or circumstances that do not meet with our approval. How it manifests. Replaying an offense, keeping a mental record of what someone did wrong, renewed anger when we remember it, bitterness, withdrawal, distrust, or wanting the other person to suffer consequences. Sounds like, I can't forget what they did. They don't deserve my forgiveness. If I forgive them, it's like saying what they did was okay. Spiritual effects can create a chronic craving for revenge. Resentment keeps our attention and emotional energy connected to a past hurt and can cause old wounds to shape new experiences. Physical effects: arthritis, bladder infections, digestion issues, heart disease, high blood pressure, lung issues, urinary tract infections. Origin of pattern may develop from unresolved hurt, betrayal, injustice, disappointment, rejection, or anger, especially when we believe the harm was never acknowledged or repaired. Change the pattern. Meditate to learn that resentment hurts self as well as others. Check out legacy resentment. Identify the hurt beneath the resentment and what we are still wanting from the other person. Separate forgiveness from approval. We can recognize clearly what happened, maintain boundaries, and still choose not to carry the emotional burden of it. Spite, core pattern. Act of harming self, whether spiritually or physically, hoping those who hurt us will notice and feel guilty for what they have done or not done. In other words, a nonverbal guilt trip. How it manifests. Withholding communication, affection, cooperation, happiness, or success in an attempt to punish another person or make them recognize our pain. Rather than expressing hurt directly, we communicate it through our behavior. Sounds like, the unspoken message may be, you hurt me and I want you to know how badly. I refuse to let you see me happy after what you did. Spiritual effects. Choosing to live life in misery or deprivation. Spite keeps us connected to the person we are trying to punish. In trying to make them suffer or feel guilty, we may sacrifice our own peace and well-being. Physical effects. Addictions, digestive issues, heart disease, high cholesterol, lung problems, nose or sinus issues, OCD. Origin of pattern. May develop when we feel deeply hurt or powerless and do not know how to communicate our pain directly. It can also be learned through family patterns of silence, withdrawal, suffering, or self-sacrifice. Change the pattern. Meditate to learn how the desire for revenge leads to other poor spiritual choices like condemnation, contempt, control, criticism, feeling like a victim. Ask, if I were no longer trying to send this person a message through my suffering, what would I choose for myself? Give ourselves permission to live well, whether or not the other person apologizes, changes, or understands. Forgiveness. Core pattern. Forgiveness means not resenting those who have angered, harmed, or failed us in some way, but rather seeking understanding before jumping to conclusions. Knowing why something happened can make forgiveness easier, but it is possible to forgive without that information. Allowing for the possibility that we may not yet understand can help us let go of injuries. How it manifests. Remembering a painful experience without repeatedly reliving the anger or desire for revenge. We can acknowledge what happened, learn from it, establish appropriate boundaries, and continue living well. Sounds like, I don't want to carry this hurt anymore. I can forgive without pretending what happened was okay. I can release resentment and still maintain healthy boundaries. Spiritual effects. Releases resentment and the desire for revenge, creating greater freedom, peace, compassion, and understanding. Physical effects. Releasing chronic resentment, anger, and emotional distress may reduce the ongoing physical stress associated with repeatedly reliving painful experiences. Build the pattern. Do the forgiveness exercises, then read. More about forgiveness. See, why do we get sick, suffer injuries, or have accidents? Meditate and ask for guidance. Identify what we are holding on to and why. Separate forgiveness, reconciliation, and trust. Forgiveness releases resentment. Reconciliation is a decision about the relationship. Trust is built through experience and behavior. Release the expectation that another person must apologize, understand, change, or make amends before we can heal. The goal is not to erase the memory, but to remember without recreating the original suffering. Final notes and the relationship on how these thought patterns connect. Pain can create blame. Blame can feed resentment. Resentment can create a desire for revenge. Spite can turn that desire into choices that also harm ourselves. Forgiveness helps release the cycle. Blaming others says, none of this is mine. Blaming self says, all of this is mine. Truth asks, what is mine to take responsibility for? What belongs to someone else? And what can I learn from this experience? The core pattern and what's really happening. At its core, this group of thought patterns reflects our relationship with responsibility, hurt, and our own agency. When blame and resentment govern our choices, we remain focused on the past. We may carry too much responsibility or too little. We refresh old emotional pain, and we can lose sight of our own agency. When responsibility, understanding, and forgiveness replace blame, we acknowledge our part without condemning ourselves. We allow others to be responsible for their choices. We establish boundaries when needed. We release the need for revenge, and we reclaim our freedom to choose what happens next. The healing truth. Blame says, someone must be at fault. Truth says, I can seek understanding and recognize responsibility without condemnation. Self-blame says, if I had been different, this wouldn't have happened. Truth says, I am responsible for my choices. Others are responsible for theirs. Resentment says, I cannot let go because what happened was wrong. Truth says, I can acknowledge that something was wrong without continuing to carry it. Spite says, I need you to feel how much you hurt me. Truth says, I do not need to harm myself or another person for my pain to be valid. Forgiveness says, I choose understanding and freedom over resentment and revenge. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It does not make harmful behavior acceptable. It does not require reconciliation, and it does not automatically restore trust. As blame decreases, responsibility becomes clearer. As responsibility becomes clearer, agency returns. As understanding grows, resentment loosens. As resentment is released, forgiveness becomes possible. And as forgiveness grows, we become freer to live in the present.